Now, the coronavirus has not spared government officials, and several cabinet ministers have contracted the virus. Some have had to go into self-isolation or at worst have been admitted to hospital. So what plans are in place when high-ranking officials fall ill, and what is the impact of their absence on the rest of the country? To discuss this, I'm joined by political analysts Karima Brown as well as Xolani Dube from the Zubera Institute. Thank you very much to both my guests for joining us. Perhaps it would be amiss of us to not give a reaction to the news of public schools closing for 4 weeks. Karima, let me start with you. Any surprises on your end?
No, not at all, Gugu. As you know, the ANC's alliance partner, particularly COSATU, and in this instance SATU, has been at the forefront of campaigning for schools to be closed. And that was the expectation. As you know, there was a series of consultations between themselves and the Cabinet and also the National Command Council. But there's also been a massive movement on the ground where the total shutdown of schools has involved individual principals of schools, teachers, many of whom were on the front line dying, and they've campaigned really hard to have public schools closed during the peak period. And I think the World Health Organization and the President's reference last night to it, which essentially says that you open schools within the context of putting your numbers down, not before, was the kind of deciding factor. So I think a victory for teacher organizations, but also many parents and many individual principals and people attached to schools who were, of course, very vulnerable, even though children themselves were not getting very ill with the disease to do.
Xolani, many people have the belief that unions in this country are running the show. Is that a fair assessment?
Look, Dudu, I would like to put that argument aside and look at the big dialectic in our analysis of what are the causes and the effect of the schools to be closed. I think it is an indictment to the ANC being in power for the past 26 years, because you know very well, Dudu, that the only schools that are closed or are going to close are the public schools, and the public schools are the ones that serve the millions and the millions of the condemned of this country, whereas the private schools are there and functioning, and it shows that the colonialism and apartheid cleavages still exist in our country, and the ANC had failed to do away with these cleavages. And so the people here who are at the receiving end are those ones who were at the forefront during the slogan that says liberation first and education later. And so I think we are really seeing the kids of the condemned being condemned further, and we will see the rise of the kids of the elite in future be the one who are the bosses and who are the leaders of the children of the condemned. And so it's just the continuation of the cleavages that we have seen in the past, and it seems as if the ANC is embracing it and is nurturing such kind of cleavage to happen also in the future.
Karima, your assessment of governance during this pandemic?
Well, there's a range of things that we can say. On the economy, I think government has failed substantially. If you look at the initial bailout and what has actually been paid out, that 500 billion package has been hollowed out completely. I support a lot more intervention, particularly for the informal economy, given that 60% of South Africa's population actually ekes out an existence there. We've got the gig economy that we need to look at. And to come back to the point that Xolani was making about private schools, the fact that we have an unequal education system is a reality in South Africa. And I think what we need to do and what communities need to do is we shouldn't argue that the schools must stay open because poor children are going to be behind. I think we need to save the teachers' lives, but demand that the price of data comes down. It is high time that government makes data available at all public schools so that we can get into the fourth industrial revolution and begin to teach our children. But more importantly, Dudu, the government has at its disposal 12 indigenous language stations via the public broadcaster. It has the public broadcaster at its disposal, and teaching can actually happen via television and radio. So I don't think that there's enough thought that has been given to exactly how education can happen if children shouldn't be at schools. This idea that the schools need to be open and that's the only way that learning can happen is a false narrative, because they're actually very effective instruments that are in the hands of the state that can be used to reach children in rural areas, many of whom have access to radios, and you can use language-specific stations to teach things like math and science. So schooling can happen without endangering the lives of teachers, particularly for South Africa's working class. In terms also of the corruption, I was very happy last night that the President announced a special proclamation giving the SIU a wide range of powers. But I want to issue a challenge to the head of the National Prosecuting Authority, Shamila Batoy. She needs to now inform the public, take the public into her confidence. When is she bringing those corruption cases? You can't wait for perfect cases, as the new head of the South African Secret Service Foreign Section says. You've got to take those corruption cases to court and test them, because the longer you wait, the more the confidence in the justice system is eroded. And already we see in places like the Eastern Cape, people are stealing in a large way. So I think government's credibility is on the line. But
for the purpose of time, Karima, unfortunately, it's quite limited. Let me just bring in Xolani here and ask you something in terms of a lot has been said about having struggle credentials in the country. But having struggle credentials, does that make you a better governor of a modern society like ours? Is it about struggle credentials or new ideas in terms of taking the country forward?
Look, Tutu, you have to understand that the ANC is a native ANC is kind of a native administrators. They only govern the so-called the condemned. Clearly, you can see even the issue of education. Others are supposed to be given kind of liberty to decide on what to do with their education system, whereas the others are there to be monitored. And when you look also, or when you hear the combative words or commands that comes from Begicele and Mbalula, it shows clearly that native administration of colonialism and apartheid is still trending even in this ANC government. And so for me, the issue of struggle credential is a false dichotomy kind of a discourse, because if you talk about a struggle credential, currently we have Gwede Mantashe, who is in the hospital. Can you go through the mind of a child of Bazuga, who was an activist at Xolani, who was killed when the so-called the poor were fighting against the government became a comprador bourgeoisie, trying to force the people of Xolani to accept certain conditions in order for that community resources to be mined by the Australian company. And so I think the issue of struggling credential, we need no longer really entertain it now, because we've seen the pitfalls of national consciousness of those that we thought were highly conscientized on what we, the black people and the condemned of this country, want post-apartheid. But the 26 years of our so-called, inverted commas, liberation, it has been about the betrayal. And so I don't think that now, henceforth, we need to entertain the issue of struggle credential. And if we talk about struggle credential, we have a deputy president who is the member of the ANC, who has never been in any ANC youth league. I don't think that he ever met even other ANC youth league leaders who were there in Mpumalanga when the ANC youth league was having its first conference here in South Africa. And so I don't think that the issue of struggle credential, really, we need to use it as the anchor for the black people moving forward. I think...
Xolani, let me just come in there. Unfortunately, time is an enemy and is against us. Karima, Xolani mentioned something in terms of ministers who are hospitalized and others who have contracted the virus. The absence of hospitalized ministers does not highlight a gap where you have deputy ministers, but should something happen to the minister, they're not even able to fill in. You get a minister from another portfolio to come in and stand in on their behalf. What then is the role of deputy ministers?
Look, I think the role of deputy ministers at the moment, depending which ministry you're talking about, is very much ceremonial, Dube. And I think that if you take the question of Minister Mantashe, he is in charge of minerals and energy. Energy is central for the economy. He doesn't have a deputy. So the fact that he's hospitalized and incapacitated leaves a vacuum. We need to know who is going to take charge there. In some instances, deputies deputize, but that is not always the case. You sometimes have, like you said, a minister from another portfolio stepping in. And so you have someone whose hands are not on the details of what needs to happen in a particular department. And given COVID-19, we need to look at the ages also of our cabinet ministers. Minister Mantashe is 65. Older people and older persons are particularly vulnerable at this stage. So the leadership vacuum that could develop should large numbers of the cabinet become infected is something that we need to think about and consider. And more importantly, government needs to tell us how exactly they plan to deal with this in the event that senior cabinet ministers holding very critical portfolios do fall ill and won't be able to attend. Like, for example, Minister Tulas Nesi, who is the Labour Minister. The UIF fund is being, corrupted from left, right and centre. Who is going to hold the reins whilst he is battling the disease in hospital?
On that issue of aged leadership, let's take a listen at what Mo Ibrahim had to say about that.
I wish to start really from where President Obasanjo ended. Let us start by looking at the age issue. You politely brought it and said, I like to see a critical mass. You see, I've been president for a long time. That's why you're always careful with your words. Now, this continent is continent of young people. Half of our people here are below 20 years old. Yes? Look at the average age of our presidents. It's about 63, 64 years old. We're the only continent in the world where we have presidents at 90 years old starting new terms. I mean, you guys are crazy or what? We've seen people in wheelchairs, unable to raise hands to standing for elections. This is a joke. Yes, you are right to laugh, because the whole world is laughing at us. I always say, I mean, you look around you. You look, United States, an economy of $16 trillion. We, all of Africa, are less than $1 trillion. This is a $16 trillion economy, right? The most important country in the world, like it or not. Obama, who happened to be half African anyway, became president when he's 46, 47 years old. He's president. If Obama was in Kenya, what he will be doing now? He will be driving a bus, maybe. Yeah? You look, really, and he's not the youngest president. Clinton was younger than him. Clinton became president at 46 years old. Kennedy was 40 years old, 40 odd subsequent years old when he became president. Why these big countries, much bigger than us, entrust their economies, their nuclear weapons, their oil resources to people who are in their 40s? And we only pick up people at 90 years old to lead us. To lead us where? To the grave?
Let's introduce into the conversation political analysts Karima Brown as well as Xolani Dube. Xolani, let's just pick up on the point that Karima made before we heard the words of Mo Ibrahim about aged leadership in cabinet in South Africa. Would you say that we're paying the price for having too many old leaders in our cabinet?
Look, I think the issue of age is, for me, to be quite honest, is irrelevant. What is more important is the issue of consciousness. Look at Joseph Kabila. He took DRC at the age of 30, but look what he did to that country. Look at King Mswati. He took Swaziland at the age of 30. Look what is happening in Swaziland. Currently in Johannesburg, in Gauteng, there is a scandal of PPEs. And the MSc of Health is a young person. So as well in KZN, and there are so many scandals that are there when it comes to the issues of COVID. And the people who are there are young people. And the issue of VPS are young people who are also involved in the issue of VPS scandal. And so I don't think the issue of age is more important, because there is Macron on the other side with Bernie Sanders, who have got very progressive political consciousness policies for, it was meant for USA. And so I think the most important thing is the issue of political consciousness and being patriotic and know what you want to do once you ascend to those highest positions. And so for the ANC in terms of age, as I've said, when you look at Nelson Mandela, who came out and make a certain kind of contribution into our country, and then you look at the current president that we have, and so who are really like Cyril Ramaphosa, who have got no clue what to do about the power that he's having. And so for me, it's not the issue of age, again, it's the issue of political consciousness, of class consciousness, and of knowing what you want to do with your country.
And that is where we'll leave it. A big thank you to political analysts Karima Brown and Xolani Dube from the Zubera Institute. Do stay with us. More news for you after this.